10:01, so let's go ahead and get started. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to come and join us for this webinar. My name is Crystal Ibarra. I am the Resource Program Specialist here at SITE. I will go ahead and drop my email address in the chat, so if you need to contact me after the meeting, feel free to. Just a couple of housekeeping items. This webinar is being recorded, and it will be posted onto our website within a couple days after this webinar concludes. You do have an option to speak, so please make sure that when you are not speaking that you have your microphone on mute. And at the end of this webinar, we will have a Q&A session. So as we're moving along, if there's a question that you would like to drop in the chat, please feel free to do so. And John will address your questions at the end. So with that, I will go ahead and pass it off to Ms. Shireen Simmons. She is a contract administrator for SoftChoice, and she'll go ahead and get us kicked off.
Good morning, afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us once again. Just I popped up a quick slide on your SoftChoice team. Most of you know who those reps are. I wanted to reiterate that this webinar is part of a series that we're doing, and we're really focusing on Copilot, some of those feature sets, and a lot of the security and functionality around the Microsoft solution set and AI technology. The previous webinar we did was Copilot Everything You Need to Know. That is available on the SITE website so that you can review. So if you weren't able to see that webinar, please go back and check that out. This one, as Crystal said, will also be recorded and posted on the SITE website. One of the ways that you can help us to help you in providing webinars with information that is critical or important to your needs is to share feedback with your SoftChoice rep and or SITE, or you can call me as well or email CAMSA at softchoice.com. This is a way that we'll kind of get a better understanding of what your needs are, and we can start tailoring these webinars to fit the issues that you're facing today. So hopefully you'll find some important information in this particular session. At this time, I'm going to turn it over to John Callahan. John Callahan is with us from Microsoft, and he will be taking the lead and driving this entire series. So thank you for joining, and John, over to you.
Thank you so much. Good to be with you, everyone. And as introduced, my name is John Callahan. I am a data and AI specialist for Microsoft. And so my role is to work with you on all things data modernization and AI path forward. One of the things I do want to go ahead and let you know is I'm going to ask a couple of questions more so up at the front of the presentation about how you're using generative AI. So go ahead and be ready to either come off mute or to put it in the chat, and we'll love to hear about how you're using generative AI today. But to get started, wanted to just go where we are headed now in the education space. And so the technology is here, and now it's about how we're going to leverage it, because there are many different AI tools, including generative AI, which will be our focus mostly here today. And so we see the headlines, those were very prevalent last year, but I'm also going to draw your attention to the one at the bottom. Talking to chatbots is now a $200,000 job. So I applied a Wall Street Journal article about generative AI. And so as we are now in the education space, we are already working with all of our administrators, teachers, faculty, staff, and students about how to interact with generative AI.
All right, thank you.
And so we get to skill up in these areas that are becoming more and more valuable out there in the workplace. Now, the industry analysts have a lot of different things and studies to say about generative AI as well. I'm going to draw your attention to the first OpenAI Forbes one. In the US, 80% of the workforce could have at least 10% of their work task impacted by Gen AI as predicted. So I want to go ahead and whether you use the react button, or if you want to come off mute, if you want to throw something in the chat, I'm super curious to know, how are you already kicking the tires with generative AI? So ChatGPT, Copilot for the web, other technologies. Anybody have any examples, or at least a thumbs up react if you're using these technologies so far today? All right, so we might have a clean slate here as far as the opportunities that are within our grasp. Oh, thank you, Colby. So a couple I see here.
Seeing lots of thumbs up as well.
Yeah, lots of thumbs up. Okay, maybe I missed a few of those. Research and document communication composition, fantastic. So you're already inching your way, if not even further, into the waters of generative AI. I will also point out one of the bottom McKinsey um, uh, statements here. More than 70% of survey respondents said they have already implemented or are planning to implement generative AI within 3 years. And I already see with some of your examples that you are doing that. So Jose, also thank you for your comment there. So lots of different use cases that come out of this space. All right. What about AI foundations? Let's kind of just start at the beginning. There are many, many different types of AI capabilities that are out there. Many that we've used on our phones probably for many years to date, which is computer vision, image recognition, facial recognition. We've had those in our consumer hands for many years. And then there's things, natural language processing. So whether we're using Siri, Alexa, voice to text on our phones, again, consumer ways that we're also working with it. But there's all these different branches and techniques of AI. And the one I'm also going to talk a little bit about now and a little bit more later, an example is optimization. So the bottom one, optimization was often a very difficult way of getting into AI, but we're going to see how AI optimization is also impacting education. So you see all the different branches, and Microsoft has been meeting the needs of these AI branches for many, many years. So this is kind of a layered platform of how Microsoft has provided these AI solutions in Azure for quite a long time. So I'm going to draw your attention to the second from the bottom row, customizable AI models. So there are several in vision, speech, language, decision. And yes, the Azure OpenAI service is one of our new ones over the last year and a half, but there are several different individual services in those other AI models. So just small models that you could implement. We roll those up into scenario-based services, so bot services, AI search, video indexer, a way of being able to couple together many of the different AI individual services to create solutions, and then filter those through our application platforms, as you've already seen in previous presentations as well. But my focus today is to drill in on the Azure OpenAI service and what that can mean for education. All right, let's just kind of take a baseline. What is AI? Basically, it's a broad set of techniques to train computers to complete tasks that we would otherwise do as humans. And usually they're kind of micro tasks, if you will. Large language models is the ability to train AI over top of large volumes of textual data in order to generate text, in order to categorize text and other things of that nature. So that's just kind of the baseline of AI, and then large language models, which are LLMs. So what does that mean for Microsoft? Microsoft has partnered with OpenAI. It is a different entity, but Microsoft is a large investor in OpenAI, and OpenAI provides many different model types. So whether we know what those models are or not when we're using ChatGPT, whether we're using Copilot, whether we're using Copilot for the web, or whatever the different options may be, there are different models that are going to come into play depending on what we want to do. And so a lot of probably what we're interacting with are the GPT models, but there's also things such as DALL-E, which is to be able to create images, or Whisper to create transcriptions and translations of audio files. So what can these new services do? You've already shared some examples. Content and image generation. So I saw a couple of examples, and I'm going to ask for a little bit more. I'm going to come back and so I can see the screen, but I'm going to ask for a little bit more if anybody even wants to come on mute, off mute in a minute and share a few of these things. But content and image generation. So the ability to create content, whether that's creating documents, creating policy documents, the ability to create an email. Those are different ways that Gen AI is also used. Image generation is to use something, going back to that model, DALL-E, to create an image of some entity. A lot of times we can see whimsical ways, but we can also think of how we can leverage this in education. Summarization, the ability to take large volumes or large pages of documents and summarize that down into palatable understanding. And then code generation. So that's going to be whether SQL, Python, .NET, JavaScript, all the different coding languages that are out there. And so to generate code. Now, for both a developer and also any of us who write on any regular basis, This has often been seen as the antidote to writer's block, is the ability to get out of the gate and get started and then to revise based off of what we get, because we should always be the last step in the process. And the last column here is about advanced search, is the ability to, instead of just doing a web search and finding individual keyword responses, but to aggregate best possible answers that are out there based off of multiple sources, and then have a way of linking to those individual sources. So, all right, any other examples that folks would like to share with how they're using Gen AI that you might not have already shared so far? All right, so Colby's also sharing the ability to use Copilot to assist in generating phishing training email messages. Thank you, awesome. Any other examples off mute in the chat, however it may go, that fall into any of these individual buckets? Well, I hope you continue to take advantage of the opportunity to see how these letters of recommendation, yes, other policy implementations as well. Thank you for sharing those. And so, because you're already sharing some of your examples, I'm not going to drain this slide when it comes to all the different ways that you can use these different buckets. Now, these are just ideas. And so you're going to be able to see on your own how to apply these different aspects as well. All right, so let's drill into the Azure OpenAI service. It's technically an API. So anytime that you use the Azure OpenAI service, you're going to be able to connect apps that you create or other content, and be able to do very similar things that you would do with other large language models. So the first one, let's just talk about what does it mean to interact with GPT models. This one is an example of writing a tagline for an ice cream shop, so content generation. And this is what we call the prompt. The way that we're going to interact with that is how we're asking for what its services will be. This is the response. We serve up smiles with every scoop. And so that is one quick example of content generation. This is code generation. So the prompt is about interacting with the database and to be able to create a query in Texas named Jane with all the customers in Texas named Jane. And so this is the response, is the actual the code for it. And then the last one example here, very simple example, is to create a prompt that's going to create an image, a ball of fire with vibrant colors to show the speed of innovation at our media and entertainment company. And so this was the output. You know, I kept thinking I was going to challenge everyone, and I was going to replace this image, because this image was probably generated well over a year ago. Now, if any of you want to go ahead and have a little fun, you take the prompt that I have here, go throw that into ChatGPT or Copilot Studio, and see what image it comes up with, and if you want to, put that into the chat. But that is an example of creating a prompt that's going to be image driven. All right, so there's a little bit more about even how we interact with the model. So now how we customize Azure OpenAI is also really important. All right, I'm going to go back to that ice cream shop example that I just was sharing as far as the prompt goes in and of itself. So we want to create an agent, a virtual agent for our marketing team, and we're going to call this agent Dana. And so, but we have to give Dana kind of a persona. And so this is what we call the meta context around this. And so when you start thinking about chatbots or other things at your districts, start thinking about the persona that it might take on. A persona might be different for a K-12, or excuse me, a elementary school versus junior or middle school versus high school. So you might have a different persona based off of type of school or grade level. In this case, in the ice cream shop, and this is again a chatbot for our marketing team, Dana's responses should be informational and logical. And in the bottom piece there, Dana's responses should be connected to the product catalog database, store locator. Oh, I love it, Hector. Thank you. Store locator database, M365. And so it's going to provide greater context. And that is the key here, is to be able to customize and then hook into source systems themselves. And so on the very bottom there on safety, Dana should moderate the responses to be safe, free of harm, and non-controversial. And those are actually all in line with Microsoft's responsible AI principles anyway, even though we're giving that as a persona. So now that we have that meta context, when we give it the prompt, write a tagline for ice cream shop, scoops of heaven in the heart of Phoenix. And so there is one way of being able to get the output of that particular content. All right, so because I was also just kind of touching on real quick the safety of AI, I want to talk about Microsoft's trust and governance around our AI principles. Number one key thing to remember and to know that anytime you use the Azure OpenAI service, your data is your data, always will be. And so it will never be used to fine-tune any foundational AI models. One thing that I also want to put out there is FERPA compliance. And so while Microsoft is FERPA compliant, generally speaking, and many other compliance certifications, that comes to the bottom piece. Your data is protected by the most comprehensive enterprise compliance and security controls. I often use a healthcare example, even in education, because it just helps us to understand how well Microsoft complies and works with these certifications, is the fact that it is also HIPAA compliant, again, among many other compliance offerings. Great, loving seeing the updated examples in the chat. So the Ballify representing innovation of a media company. Love it, thanks, Ben. All right, so even a little bit further is to go about the 6 pillars of Microsoft's responsible AI principles. Privacy and security, we just talked about that a little bit. Inclusiveness, accountability, transparency, fairness, reliability, and safety. All of these are very important areas to Microsoft, and you can go and read up on each one of these 6 pillars and find lots of documentation. When it comes to also reliability and safety, one thing that often comes up in the context of education is, yeah, we're going to have kids who are going to be throwing things at it just to kind of see what the responses are. But just to give you an example, if you were to ask it to be able to create a weapon, it is not going to respond to that because it does not adhere to Microsoft's AI principles. And so these are examples of how Microsoft brings a safe and reliable service to you that you're able to then leverage. All right, so let's talk about the role of GPT. So this is different examples. I'm going to start with, I pulled this from a Khan Academy TED Talk. So the CEO of Khan Academy put that out there, and this was based off of a 1984 research study done about the impact of education and the outcome of scores and how we educate. So what we have in the conventional classroom is a kind of a standard bell curve. The more effective way of educating comes to mastery learning. So both from the teacher and the learner perspective is mastering learning techniques, teaching techniques, and really honing in on those. But the most effective, according to this study, and again, quite almost 40 years ago, is one-on-one mentorship, is the ability to engage students one-on-one. Now, what does this have to do? What does this have to do with generative AI? So what we're doing is providing technology that is going to allow us to be a little bit more one-on-one or more targeted with our students. And so to start there, opportunities for AI in education is, this is how we can get a little bit more one-on-one, is personalized learning. So with generative AI and to generate content, even if you have a lesson principle or concept, the ability to create different ways of conveying that information based off of different student interests, needs, or their own learning styles, that way we can personalize that learning and then improve accessibility through those concepts with translation, captioning, read aloud, voice input. And so all of these things are within generative AI and also other Microsoft AI technologies. All right, I'm going to come back, Joe, if you don't mind, to your question a little bit in just a few minutes. The next part about it is engaging learners. A lot about personalized learning, but being able to jumpstart with ideas, get real-time feedback, and then analyze data efficiently to be able to identify patterns in students' responses using generative AI. I'm not going to go through every one of these in detail, but one of the things that we think about from a district and administrative level is to unlock productivity across the district and how we're doing very kind of common administrative tasks. And so another key aspect is preparing for the future is to be able to build AI literacy and equip students with the skills that they need to thrive in the future workforce. All right, and so all of this comes down to being secure as well and protecting your data. So these are different examples of how AI, specifically Gen AI, can be leveraged in education. So a couple quick examples. So these are going to be some prompts. So if I were to go to any of those interfaces that I can use generative AI, I could use these different kinds of examples. I'm going to just highlight the ones that are in bolded blue. Act as a tutor. I need help understanding the quadratic formula or how the quadratic formula works. Please to describe it in easy to understand terms. So I don't know about you, it took me many years into my adulthood to get more and more brave. I was not a student who would commonly raise my hand and ask questions if I didn't know something. And so the ability to be able to actually provide students with a tool, an AI tool that they could ask to clarify a concept or to re-explain it in a different way, that could be very key, whether in class or out of class. Another one, come up with 10 ways to improve memory and recall while studying for my physics exam. So just another way of just being able to ask generative AI and these AI capabilities to support us as a student. All right, if I'm a teacher, again, using the bolded examples, write multiple choice questions, provide 10 multiple choice questions about the period of Reconstruction, or about designing lessons and activities. Generate an age-appropriate explanation. Explain a lunar eclipse for an 8-year-old, or solar eclipse since we just had it. Just for fun, write lyrics, create the lyrics for a song about the founding of America. So these are all different ways that we could just interact with it and get new ideas of how to convey and teach concepts. All right, so I shared a couple of prompt examples. What we have here in this next example are many different kinds of ways that we could look at use cases for AI. I'm going to start with lesson planning. Last Thanksgiving, I live in Phoenix. I was out visiting family in Michigan. My sister-in-law is a 5th grade teacher. She had not heard about she maybe heard a little bit about ChatGPT, but I showed her she spent 2 to 3 hours every Saturday. On her Saturdays, 2 to 3 hours every Saturday creating the next week's lesson plans. And I said, hey, let's just kind of go over what this can do for you in Copilot. She texted me a week later, the week after Thanksgiving, as I got home and said, I now am doing this in 20 minutes and I'm as effective, or if not a little bit more effective in the lesson planning that she was creating. That was huge for me, just to have a personal example of a family member teaching school. And so there are many different ways that we can apply AI: class design, real-time feedback. It's a spark tool for learning to generate new ideas, as we've already been able to see. There are departments of education use cases, secure ChatGPT environment. So there are different offerings that we have for that now, but also think about chatbot or personalized communication. And increased student-teacher ratio, I'm going to come back to that 2 sigma problem that I showed earlier, right, is to be able to have AI augment our teachers to be able to get more of that one-on-one approach. School level use cases, accessibility services, data analytics summaries, aiding teachers with grading assignments. So these are going to be all different things that we can think about. Transportation, even about scheduling assistant. I'm going to show an example literally in just a moment. Now, there are many different IT use cases as well. I'm not going to focus much on these right now today, but one of the things that I will drill down on are ITSMs. I don't know how many of you have ITSMs on campus, but think ServiceNow, help desk tickets, things of that nature, is to be able to back those with generative AI to do first call resolution. So being able to allow users to solve more of their own problems or more of their own issues on their own without having to actually route a ticket to somebody to support that, or to do more intelligent routing to the right teams to support issues. So lots of different ways that we can think about AI use cases. I'm going to pause there for a second. When we think about use cases, I'm curious, in addition to some of the examples, any of these that stood out to any of those on the call today as far as ways that you could start to think and see more use cases in your districts? Chat responses also great. Any of these use cases that stood out to you that thought, oh, wait a minute, I hadn't thought about that, would love to see that. Go ahead and continue to think about that. If you have some ideas and things you want to share with the group, please do so. All right, so let's talk about AI in practice. I'm going to actually be sharing kind of different, they might feel very disparate from education, but I think we'll be able to extrapolate out how these examples will apply across our workloads in K-12. All right, number one, very, very specific, district schedule redesign. So here's an example. I talked about optimization early on in the presentation. Optimization with AI was usually really, really difficult, and it took a lot of even a master's degree specifically in optimization. What we now have with generative AI and capabilities with the large language models is the ability to have optimization at our fingertips, and this is going to be one of those examples. So the prompt, the idea, and I'm going to show a hypothesis on the next slide, was how can we redesign the teaching and learning schedule to creatively reorganize the school day to meet the needs of staff and students. So we're looking at both staff and students. We know teacher burnout is very real. We've certainly been dealing with that in a very acute way since the pandemic for sure. And so here was the big idea. If we could adjust the schedule to create more planning time for teachers, then maybe there's going to be more increased satisfaction for teachers and increased retainment of those as well. All right, some things that we have to think about. If we're going to optimize, we're going to offer this model a problem, we're going to have to define some considerations and constraints. Some things about it, school information, number of students, core content teachers. So some of the facts about the actual schools themselves. Criteria for all students that are also part of non-negotiables: lunch and the minutes of lunch for every day, recess and the minutes of recess for each day, the number of resource and specials and start and stop times, things that are non-negotiable, things that have to be a part of this problem. And so these were considerations and constraints kind of thrown out the model. And this was a first pass output of a fourth grade scheduling example. And so it's not going to be perfect, but the ability to do this very quickly and iterate through this to get to a final output is super key here. The next piece about this is, how do we revise this? Okay, that was a great first pass, but how do we revise this? I'm going to read out in the middle of the screen the further revised prompt. And actually, it doesn't offer any greater detail, but it says, and with teachers, give teachers additional planning time, which will ultimately lead to greater job satisfaction. Some kind of curious things about large language models is sometimes when we offer just some even emotional aspects, if we can call job satisfaction emotional, it responds differently and even gears up a little bit more. And there's different examples of that, which we don't have time today to kind of go through some of those nuances, but how large language models will respond. Using please and thank you actually elicits a little bit better responses as well. And so what are some of the different things we have to think about as we're looking at a new school schedule? Well, we're also going to interrogate the outcome. So I'm going to show you, numbers 3, 4, and 5 is act as a teacher, suggest changes from a teacher's perspective. Act as an elementary school design expert, reviewing the schedule and identify problems to suggest any changes. So you can ask it to act like a consultant, if you will. Number 6, act as a principal, review the schedule, act as a special education teacher, act as a parent, act as a student, to continue to give it different perspectives and what those outcomes would be. And so I'm not going to go through this in detail, but this was an example working with one of my colleagues worked with an East Coast based district. And this was the net result, is the net gains and losses of minutes based off of the different areas going through this rigor. Now, one of the things I mentioned a second ago is you can ask it to basically be your consultant. We can hire outside firms, we can hire outside consultants and pay money there, but now we can use large language models to actually act as that for us. So on the right-hand side, you see constraints. We can then say, ask me questions about the problem that I posed, and it can then provide those questions and then refine its responses based off of that. I'm going to read just the top line. I'm going to read it as a question. So a question asked, students are at specials when core content teachers are planning, yes or no? Asking all of these different questions and a whole page or two of questions to further refine what the school schedule would come out to be. Now, this district actually implemented a lot of this and saved over 10,000 hours of work using a large language model to help with the school scheduling. All right, one of the non-education examples, but again, I hope we can extrapolate out how we can compare this with difficult concepts that are sometimes shown in education. So let's think about MRIs. We all go to the doctor. We all have interactions with our physicians. This is about an MRI. So MRIs are they are complex. It's a multi-stage process. There's a lot of workflow that goes on to it. There's limited time for result explanation. So if we think about the demands that we have on us in K-12, we have limited times for lots of different things. And there's also at times language and cultural barriers that we have to think about, and in this case, in an MRI example, that can lead to patient disengagement or student disengagement. So in this MRI example, what are the innovation opportunities? Is to take something that is complex and then be able to reduce that and simplify that and translate to account for culture, language, and reading levels, and to be clear and concise. So this is a very crude example, but dropping an MRI report and basically asking us to extract patient relevant information and explain it that is easy for me as a patient, that's non-jargon, and show it to me in English and Spanish with publicly linkable resources. And so this was the first pass output. And it's still, if I were to read through it, it's going to be a little bit more heady. And I'm simply going to ask it to simplify, and it does that, simplifies, and then in the bottom in blue, you see it is translating in Spanish. And so that is being able to account for something that's complex, to simplify it to my level of understanding, and then also, if needed, to translate that. So quick example that we can see and extrapolate out. All right, this one's kind of an interesting example that one of my colleagues put together. So it's basically asking ChatGPT or Copilot for the web is unleash your inner leader. There was an article that was written. It's called Unleash Your Inner Leader, Master the Art of Healthy Narcissism. Interesting concept all around. And so the prompt was basically, are you aware of this article written by this author that's testing what's called a U-shaped relationship? And the response was, yep, I'm familiar with this article. And this was the summarization of that article. I want to take that a step further. Act as an executive coach. If I had to teach this article and the concepts of this healthy way of leading, is break this down into skills, knowledge, learning outcomes, and it is super really good at categorization. So to be able to give a response like this and break this down to knowledge, skills, abilities, and those outcomes. And then the next piece of that is, all right, let's now translate this and create a course title, learning methods, outcome, and lesson plan, basically a syllabus, if you will, based off of that content. So purely ability to help support lesson planning, syllabus, other kinds of taking other content and breaking that down that we can add to our learning and instruction. Questions or comments so far? All right, Joe, I do want to come back to your question. I see it there. I'm going to come back to that in a little bit, if you don't mind. Okay, so what are one of the ways that we can get started with this? Well, we have different partners that are out there as well. We have a software partner that works on our marketplace, our Azure marketplace. I'm just going to just give a quick example. They're called Zamo. And what do? Is they create basically an out-of-the-box solution to generate many different kinds of interactive chatbots for our districts. And so they create an easy button solution, because when you're using Azure OpenAI, there's a lot of times you're going to need some other services in there as well, whether the ability to index a lot of document content before it goes into OpenAI, or the ability to translate other things that are going on with that. So there's a lot of different ways to be able to pull together for a larger solution. And we have a Azure Marketplace partner who puts something like that together. So they create an easy, simple way of launching OpenAI into Azure. So I'm going to, and also I should update this, because the ability to connect to something like a Canvas LMS is also there already, and to pull that content in and interact with it. They also have something what's called an education conversational library. You'll see a lot of higher education examples, and this is continuing to grow and grow and grow. But you also see K-12 examples. So if we want to use the generative AI as a chatbot of interacting with a school or interacting with a district, but also provide an example of how you can give a one-click response. Oh, I want to report a child's school absence. I might not know where to do that or what phone number to call. And so I'm interacting with the chatbot on the website in order to do that. Well, something that a little bit next step than just giving the telephone number or the website is actually then provide, based off of what users are asking for, that next one-click response of, oh, I can just do it straight from here. And the chatbot was able to know that without having to prepare all these questions and answer pairs. Okay, so in general, how do we get started? Number one is growing AI literacy and skills across the organization. A lot of that's going to come by the way that many of you have even shared your examples here today. It's just to use it. It's just to start to see how it comes out. And I love those couple of examples, even with the image examples that some of you threw in there. That's a way of kicking the tires and understanding how can I interact with the large language models or OpenAI. So, and my next slide is going to have a list of links and resources around some of this. The next piece about this is get your data estate AI ready with Azure. So the ability to actually leverage all your data assets is really, really key here. And so you can build a data strategy in Azure that is going to be very efficient to pulling out as much information and intelligence from what you already have at the district level. And then designing intelligent app experiences with Azure AI. I just showed an example of a software partner vendor that allows you to do that right out of the box very quickly, is develop those apps, chatbots, and other interfaces. So this is a list of resources, but now I want to start touching on, again, how do we get started? How do we prepare? So I'm going to talk about getting your data Azure ready. So I'm going to kind of depart, hopefully it's not a hard left turn, but I'm going to depart a lot of conversation around Gen AI to, all right, what about the data that is there that we want to be able to leverage? So one of the things is to be able to modernize your data and bring that to Azure. And so how do we do that? So now I'm going to get very database specific here, using Microsoft SQL Server as an example, is we can bring that data to Azure so that it'll be online to AI, because AI is only as good as the data that it can see when it's going to be contextual to your institution and districts. So there are different flavors of SQL. One is you can lift and shift a database to Azure. But the two key pieces here are in the middle, is there are actually what are called database as a service, where you don't have to do patching and security and all these things, that the databases are just there as a service without all that overhead. And let me give you an example of that. So I'm kind of diving down a little bit more on the technical database end of things. If we are managing SQL Server on-prem today, or a database, it could be other databases as well. Microsoft Azure supports open source databases, others as well. If you're managing this on-prem, everything in the first column that you see that is in dark blue are things that you have to manage as a district and as a team. The data center, the hardware, the virtualization layer, the operating system, the database provisioning, patching, and so forth, high availability, disaster recovery, backups, all of those things are part of what has to be managed by you and your teams, and the workloads and administrative overhead. If you were to simply lift and shift that into Azure, then Microsoft takes on, in the light blue, in the second column, the data center, the hardware, and the virtualization. If you were to move to database as a service, then Microsoft takes in the patching, the scaling, all of those other administrative tasks, including high availability, disaster recovery, and backups. Now, if you still need very database specific hands-on, you can still have that. And there's another flavor where we just provide you the database, and whatever applications that you need to run on top of that is what you then serve. So this is the advantage of being able to modernize data into Azure. Other aspects of that is using AI-powered features. So AI, number one, in optimizing database performance and tasks that are there without having to change your SQL skill sets. Those are all going to stay the same. And the ability to reduce the cost of running that in Azure based off of your licenses. And most important, on the far right there, is the security. Elevated security, making your data more secure in the Azure with intelligent threat detection and other compliance offerings. Now, one of the things I want to press upon you here is that when you bring your data to Azure, it is also what's called evergreen. Again, that's where you don't need to do the security patching and the scaling, because it is always the most recent release of SQL Server. So AI, what does this mean about generative AI? John, you've been talking about OpenAI the whole time. How does this relate to SQL? Number one, getting your data ready to see that SQL data. Number two is what is now in private preview. So you've already been exposed in previous sessions about using copilots, and Microsoft has a whole family of copilots. And one of the things that is now in private preview is Azure SQL Copilot. So a copilot that's going to come to your databases when it is in Azure. So these are just some documentation pages that I snipped from learn.microsoft.com about examples. So this is real estate. What agents have listed more than 2 properties? I can then go and start asking questions of my district school specific data. Tell me the rank of each agent by property sales and show name, total sales, and rank. Administrative examples. How much space is being used by this database? What are the active connections running right now? So we can see the different ways that Copilot will be coming to SQL that is in Azure and being able to leverage that data that is there. A couple of screenshots. All right, I'm now interacting with my database really. Hey, my database is slow. What gives? And the large language model being able to go and gather administrative data or log data and be able to start providing reasons why that might be the case. How do I tune that high CPU query and things of that nature? So now we're bringing generative AI, large language model, Copilot to SQL. And so preparing your data today for when this is also generally available will be very key. One of the things I also want to be able to mention is, all right, what about this lift to the cloud? Well, we provide services. Well, we will do a zero cost migration for you from your on-prem, not only SQL Server, but Windows servers into Azure at no cost to you. And so that is how you begin to prepare your data estate for using copilots and Gen AI. All right, I'm going to take this a step further. Those were individual databases. What about data warehousing? What about analytics and BI and reports that we share? We also have a new platform called Fabric for data analytics. And what is Fabric? Well, it's data lake. It's data warehousing. It's real-time analytics, not often as needed in districts, but still the capability there, business intelligence, and then the governance all around that data platform. But what we also have today in our data analytics platform is Copilot for Fabric. And so the ability to ask questions of your data warehouse, not even just database specific, but of the entire data warehouse, to understand our data sets, to actually create reports for us. So pages in Power BI, reports and other things of that nature, and be able to provide that to us as a district. So I'm not going to go, this is kind of a pre-canned example. I will share a YouTube video of this at another, as a follow-on, but because I'm not going to show the full video. One of the things I want to talk about is how we're able to then ask it about the data. But what's more than that is its ability, and what we just saw in that second, I'm going to jump ahead there, is to actually create a report and a dashboard based off of the data that we have at hand and what we're asking of it. So these are just a few capabilities of Copilot that are in the data analytics platform, including for Power BI. All right, so I've covered a lot of ground. I've talked about a lot of different technologies and even Gen AI in specific. But just to kind of wrap this up with Fabric is the underpinnings of Copilot for a lot of these data analytics to get further insights on the health of our students, on the progress of our students, even the health of our teachers and faculty and how they're doing and how we can better support them. I'm not going to go too much more into this, but one aspect of Fabric is also how we store our data and the ability to use all these different data analytics services over top a unified place of where we put all of our data. So what we call One Lake is our branding of a data lake to be able to put all of your data. So all these individual databases, your student information system, your learning management system, all these different places to get that full 360 view of our student performance. And we can store that in One Lake and then use the different Fabric services to go from there. All right, I sped through a lot of content in a short period of time. I'm going to stop sharing now. We're going to open it up for question and answer. And I do want to come back to Joe, something you asked quite a while ago. Your question, can users train the model to provide an output response on building augmented reality? So if I can get a little bit more clarification, that's why I wanted to kind of put that one, make sure we got to it in the Q&A part of it as well, is to be able to talk about augmented reality. Joe, any further depth or clarification on that question that we could that I could dive into on that?
Yeah, John, thanks for coming back to the question. Actually, can you hear me okay?
I can, yeah, thanks.
Okay, great.
Yes.
No, actually, it's not augmented reality. You were referencing the fact there were some guardrails that Microsoft puts out of the box in terms of if in the example, if a student wants to build a gun, for example. AR was really referencing an automatic rifle, right? So if anybody, are you able to train it, right? There's some guardrails that are out of the box versus what you can train the model. So would those guardrails still take place even though a student is still trying to teach it to train to give it some output on how to build a gun?
Yeah, so what I hear you saying is like, hey, there are techniques that people really try to do to go and hack large language models to still elicit a response. And number one, the guardrails are very, very strong. And number two, if you kind of remember that little example about the ice cream shop, I created a persona for that chatbot. When you do that meta context, that's when you can then hammer it down even more. Do not do anything outside of the scope of what this chatbot or this conversation is supposed to do. So if anything's really out of left field, you've already nailed it down even further. I would dare say that the guardrails are very, very strong and rigorous as it is. But if we want to be extra safe and just kind of throw in extra guardrails just to make sure is in that persona and the meta context is how you define that. I apologize. When I saw AR, I thought we were talking about augmented reality, but I understand now. Thank you for clarifying.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, that's kind of the general way that we would go about that. All right. Now, just want to open up to the audience, please. Other questions?
I have a quick question. I don't know if it's outside the scope or if you can have resources or something that we can dig into more, but I know Microsoft released the what are they marketing it as? I guess AI for service, or I forgot what they call it, or Copilot for service. And there's a specific help desk that they have the integration with, which is Zendesk, which is a very popular help desk that's used. And so we're actually a Zendesk customer, so I'd love to learn more on how Copilot for service would work, and if we can speak with somebody on to get more information on that.
Yeah, I'm going to speak to that because as far as that specific Copilot, I might be a little off or a little behind the curve. You can imagine most everything on my slide probably changed while I was even talking about it. But using the Azure OpenAI service, when you're using the Azure environment, you can absolutely go against other APIs. And Zendesk is going to have an API. I've actually worked with a couple of other customers using Zendesk and put those hooks in. If there's more out of the box where we've announced a Copilot for service desk kind of things, that then I need to go and do my own homework. But generally speaking, when you're using the Azure set of services and tools, you have that customizable ability to go and get those APIs, including like a Zendesk.
Got it. Thank you, John.
Sure thing.
Go ahead, Kobe.
When do we anticipate students, minors, I know it's available for 18 plus students, but when will Copilot be available for minors?
So Copilot is a little different than Azure OpenAI. I think if Carlton is still on, I think I saw him jump on earlier in the call. Carlton, I don't know if you have any comments around that question when it comes to Copilot specifically. And if Carlton is not on that anymore, that's okay too. But
He's on, but he might be muted.
Fair enough. Fair enough. So I don't have a comment on the Copilot because I work specifically on the Azure open box version of the OpenAI services.
And what we can do is we'll review this recording. We'll take down these questions. And when Crystal posts the information on the site website, and she perhaps could even email you out, we'll get some answers as best as we can to these questions and make sure you get them.
Absolutely. I did throw into the chat just some content, something I didn't show today. I mentioned one of our partners that is in our marketplace Samo, and they have one-click deployments for things, and you'll see on their slide there that Zendesk is one of those as well. And thank you, Joe, for dropping in these links. I'm going to be boning up on that here real soon. All right, other questions or comments?
I had a question about licensing for M365 for like the Word, PowerPoint, Outlook, those components. I call them the base components after like the internet piece of Copilot. Is there any changes coming to the CAMSA agreement for those districts that are paying for A3 or A5 licenses?
Again, I'll look to my colleagues, maybe Fadi and
Yeah,
or
John,
Yeah.
at this moment, no, not even for EDU, don't have any kind of special pricing, as everybody is aware of this at this moment. But as soon as we do, we can work with Site and SoftChoice be able to embed this in the CAMSA agreement.
Okay, yeah, that sounds great. Just because I know that AI is a newer conversation, may not have been around when the CAMSA agreements were being made.
Correct.
But definitely be good to look at incorporating that in for those districts that are paying for A3 or A5 licenses.
Okay.
Colby.
Sorry, guys, another question. So many of our on-premise applications that leverage SQL, they don't support the Azure instance of SQL. So if we did virtualize those SQL boxes and put them in the Azure cloud, would we be able to utilize Copilot and Fabric with that data warehousing, or does it have to be in an Azure hosted instance of SQL?
Yeah, great questions. The first question is, if I have that in an Azure VM instead of Azure Platform as a Service, is it going to support Copilot? Because it is in private preview, we're not going to have all the kind of details of all the different ways that we're going to support the different Azure SQL flavors. So that's to come, number one. Sorry, that's not a great answer. Number two, though, if you're pulling that data from SQL Server into Fabric, into a data warehouse, into a data lake, yes, you can then use Fabric Copilot over top of that data that you pulled into the data lake and leverage it from there.
Excellent. Thank you.
Hey, Kobe, Carton is back online. Do you mind if I just repeat the question for him? And Carton will be able to see if he can be able to answer it now, or do we need to come back to
Yeah,
it?
Carlton, we need to know when Copilot's going to be available for our students, the minors, not 18 plus.
Right. Yeah. So as you alluded to, it's available for 18 plus. The last I heard is that it is currently in private preview right now for 13 plus. That's what they're reviewing. Not generally available. I don't have a timeline of when that will be generally available, but the last discussion I heard internally is that they're looking at how to be able to roll that up for 13 plus.
So if it's 13 plus, how would districts, I mean, are we going to have to just start creating different groups for students that are 13 plus to give them the license, or how's Microsoft doing that in the private preview?
That I am not aware of. I believe, and hopefully I'm explaining this correctly, how they apply it at the higher end level when it's 18 plus, is that there is a certain flag that they have for student use benefit licenses for them to be able to know if that student is 18 up or not. I don't know the specific details, but there's a way they were able to determine that at the higher ed level. Again, that's the kind of the complex, right? When it comes to K-12, is that it's not as well confined as a user-based circle than higher ed, because you are dealing with multiple districts, you're all dealing with multiple school level types. So anything that I would be giving, to be perfectly honest with you, would be more speculation. I do not have the insight as yet on how they're applying that to 13 plus in the private preview.
Thank you.
I see a question in a chat. Any idea on when we may see Copilot built into Windows 10 Education 22H2?
That does fall a little out of my scope as well.
Is that a Carlton question?
I do know there is on the roadmap a Windows Copilot, but I don't have a timeline for that. I just saw recently that there's been advancements for Copilot within OneDrive, so that's another thing that's part of the roadmap that I saw in an internal posting.
So from a soft choice perspective, as soon as we get announcements for from Microsoft, we make those available, and we'll continue to make those available through your reps and other avenues as soon as the information comes. I see another question. I am curious about implicit bias in the image generation. Recently, I wanted to compliment a custodian for a job he had done, so I asked Bing to image generator to produce an image of a super custodian. All 4 images that were created were male African Americans. I made no mention of race in my prompt.
Yeah, that is an interesting something that you've seen there. And as far as how large language models, and this is one of the things as OpenAI continues to develop the models themselves to begin to purge out bias and implicit bias. These things are still being updated in the models themselves. No great answer to that why that was going to be the example, but those models, so GPT 3.5, for example, is the oldest model that you can use now, and there's GPT-4, and we'll see other versions of those coming forward. And as OpenAI continues to work on those model refinements, those things will begin to be purged out more.
Okay, we only have about 3 minutes left, so we have time for one more question if there is anyone. All righty, with that, we're going to wrap up this call. We really, truly hope that you found the information informative. If you have any additional questions or need clarifications, you can contact your Soft Choice rep. You can also email CAMSA at softchoice.com. As I stated before, this video and the slide deck will be available on the site.org website. We'd also like any feedback from you to our reps, myself, or your site partner on any future webinars that you'd like to see. We are trying to do these quarterly, and we're trying to maintain this series and make sure that the information that we provide is helpful to you as you move forward. So thank you again for your time. I hope you found this very informative. Thanks, John. Thanks, Fadi. Thanks, Crystal. And thanks to Carlton for jumping on and offering some additional assistance. We appreciate you all. So have a great day.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Thank you, everybody.
everyone.
Take care, everyone.